Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. I already made an ultimate guide to Outbreak where I talked about the basics of the mode and explained the general flow for how it works on the whole. Today though, I want to dive into the details of how to get high rounds in Outbreak. No matter if you're playing co-op or solo, these strats that I'm going to share with you are currently some of the best ones that you can use to get to those higher rounds really easily and show off to all of your friends when they're dying on round 7 and you're like, meh, I'm on round 20, mate. So, to structure this, I'm going to split the video into kind of 3 or maybe 4 sections. Whilst 1 to 3 will be the early game, 4 to 6 will be the mid game, 7 to 10 will be the late game, kind of, and then 11 plus is just everything you do for the rest of your run to World 100 if you want to. Now, before we even talk about the gameplay, we do need to discuss some of your skill tier upgrades. Those are the upgrades that you unlock with your Ethereum crystals in the menus. There are a couple of them that are just so useful that I would prioritize them over pretty much anything else, and I'm going to run through those quickly with you now. Obviously, it's going to take a couple of runs of Outbreak in order to earn those crystals to get those upgrades, so I'm not expecting you to have these in literally game 1, but I think that you should be focusing on grinding towards these pretty much as soon as possible. First off, I'll mention a few things that you should just probably bring to tier 4, and then I'll mention some that you should do 4 and 5 on. So, ammo mods, let's start with that. I think that the Cryo Freeze tier 4 is really useful, and I'm going to be recommending Cryo Freeze throughout this video, which might sound crazy, but bear with me here, guys. I know that everyone loves Deadwire, and some people are really big fans of Brain Rot because you can turn mimics and stuff like that, but trust me, Cryo Freeze is really strong. It works really well for this strategy, and so that's what I'm recommending, and I'd suggest you get it to tier 4. I also think tier 4 on Frenzied Guard is a really good pick because that's going to increase its duration to 15 seconds, and I'm again going to be recommending Frenzied Guard for this strategy, and so this is a really good option. You could optionally be using Ether Shroud and get that to tier 5 to get 2 charges, but I'm a big Frenzied Guard fan. I'll explain more later, and so that's my recommendation. Get that to tier 4. Now let's move on to what's basically essential to get to tier 5. I'd say Shotguns tier 5 is so useful because it's going to increase your close quarters bonus damage and your critical bonus damage by significant amounts, and seeing as we're going to be using shotguns for nearly all of this strategy, this is a really powerful upgrade. I also highly recommend getting Jug to tier 5. The extra armor durability is amazing, but also basically getting Dying Wish just by buying Jug is an incredible extra bonus at tier 5, so this is a really good one. And if you're solo, you may also want to go for tier 5 Quick Revive, because that's going to mean that when you kill an enemy while downed, you're not only going to revive yourself, but it's also going to save you using your self-revive. So this can be a really powerful thing for getting out of an accidental down in a pinch. It is still useful co-op, don't get me wrong, but the tier 4 is maybe more co-op centric, I think. But for me, I think that Quick Revive is a great purchase, basically no matter what, either way. If you're thinking that in your game, you're going to be going to really high rounds, like I'm talking like 15, 20 plus, then I also think that Stam tier 5 is incredibly useful. It's going to remove all sprint speed fall off, and when the zombies start super sprinting at you, it's going to be really handy having this tier 5. The rest of these, in my mind, are really optional, and if none of the tier 5s are really speaking to you and you've sort of got a stack of crystals that you're sitting on, maybe consider something like getting Melee tier 5, because that's going to give you some lifesteal whenever you melee an enemy, which is a pretty cool bonus, and it's just a cool thing to kind of spend your crystals on while you're trying to figure out what else to spend them on. So let's begin with section 1, the early game. To begin with, I recommend you spawn in with a shotgun as your loadout weapon. Now you can choose the Gallo or the Hauer, depending on which you have more leveled up and things like that, but I will be very clear here that the Hauer is a better option overall. It has a better DPS, and so if you've got the Hauer unlocked and leveled, then absolutely use that. But if you've got the Gallo, that will work as well. It's just that your DPS will be reduced. You're going to want to make sure that any attachments that give you extra bullet velocity or bullet damage or damage range are equipped, and also probably equip anything that's going to extend your magazine size as well. And then beyond that, you can kind of customize your attachments. If you need more in-depth loadout info, then I've got videos on the most overpowered loadouts in the entire game, which I'll link in the description below and in the top right-hand corner of the screen right now. But for the purpose of the video, I'm going to assume that you're spawning in with a decently customized Hauer. Once you've spawned, take a look at the map around you and identify where your side quest objectives are. I strongly recommend that you do one side quest objective at least in your game before you move on to World Tier 2, as this is going to give us a nice points boost and also give us a second weapon potentially, or maybe give us a perk. In order to get to that side quest though, I recommend you use a jump pad, and this isn't financial advice, but just like investing in Bitcoin, you'll put your 500 points in, fly through the air at an alarming speed, and by the time you've touched the ground, you'll have doubled your money. Terms and conditions apply. You have to actually pick up the points canisters. Don't be an idiot here. Just grab the points out of the air. Nice. While you're doing your side quest, keep an eye out for armor vests dropped on the floor. Even if you don't have armor currently, you can pick up an armor vest and it will give you tier 1 armor for free. Now, at this point, while you're doing this, if you're in a co-op game, you could have one of your teammates peel off and do something else in the map, such as just killing some roaming zombies or trying to do one of the Gersh balls if they find one of those as well. That'll mint them a load of extra points, you'll get all the kills for whatever activity you're doing, and everybody wins. The reason I think doing this on round 1 is really a good idea, even though your chances of getting like a rare weapon are super low at this point in your game, is that the points that you earn and the rewards that you do get are incredibly easily attained. These are not something that you're going to have to fight tooth and nail for. World Tier 1 is obviously the easiest one, and yet you can still get free perks on World Tier 1, you can still get loads of points, you can still get free armor, you can still get all of these rewards that are really useful and have meaning in your game. And granted, you also might get a gun that's just a blue or something, and you're not going to use that, but that's fine because you're still going to be earning points as you go, and so it's worth doing. Once you've done that first side quest, head over to your main objective and get started on that. You can obviously just roam around and kill more zombies if you want, but bear in mind, you're not going to earn that many points for just killing stragglers around the map because the points numbers that you get from those kills are reduced in Outbreak. So usually it's kills while in activities that I would prioritize over any others because those activities obviously have rewards of their own. The caveat to this is if you ever run past a box or you hear the little coalescence jingle, stop where you are and go and get that box. On World Tier 1, you're not going to get anything crazy out of them, but you're going to get a bunch of salvage, and that's going to mean that in a couple of worlds time, you end up at tier 3 armor a lot faster than anyone that hasn't been scavenging in the meantime. Assuming you are now honing in on that main quest objective, I would say that if you're not going to do it together, it's on World Tiers 1 and 2 and maybe 3 that is the best time to do that. Like later in the game, you're going to have to do these things together. You are absolutely going to have to. And so if you want to kind of explore and roam around a bit here and do side quests while your other teammates do the main quest, for instance, then that's totally fine. And you're going to earn more points doing that. So more power to you if you can make that work. When you finish that main objective, and if you need a guide on the objectives themselves, like I said, that ultimate guide that I made for Outbreak is the one for you to watch. I'm not going to talk about the individual objectives here again because I think it's self-explanatory, but it's explained in the ultimate guide if you need it, so links below. And when you've done that and you've gone over to your anomaly and spawned in your beacon, you'll be able to get a free extra 100 points by lying down in front of the Wonder Fizz machine. And this applies every world you go to, so you might as well just keep lying down in front of those machines and keeping getting points. Now at this point, you have a choice to make in terms of your in-game economy. Let's talk about points first. If you've got like 8k points, then I think the best use of those points is to pack-a-punch your Hauer, I know, already, and also pick up Juggernog. This is going to make you strong in World Tier 2 and also give you a safety net so you can more efficiently harvest more points for other perks then, and in my mind, these two purchases give you the best risk-adjusted returns. If you have leftover points after that and want to keep spending, then I'd go for Quick Revive here. Again, it's a safety net. It's about our health that we are trying to maintain as opposed to our firepower, and that's because a pack-a-punched Hauer is already going to stomp zombies on World Tier 2, so you can focus on keeping yourself alive instead of keeping the enemies dead, if that makes sense. Salvage also needs to be considered here. Let's say you found an armor vest on World Tier 1, and so you've got Tier 1 armor currently. You have two choices. You either be aggressive and use some of the salvage that you basically saved by getting that armor vest and use that on an upgraded weapon rarity instead, or you play conservatively and you say, well, I just want the extra health no matter what, and so you focus on saving up for Tier 2 armor. If you didn't find armor here, though, you have a slightly different decision to make, once again, based on your risk tolerance. If you're a more confident player and more happy taking risks, you could just assume that in the next world tier you'll get your armor vest, and as such, you should spend on the weapon rarity upgrade right now. Whereas if you just want to stay safe through and through and you still don't have any armor vest and it's kind of getting on your nerves, then just buy it. At the end of the day, these decisions aren't going to matter in like half an hour when we're actually at some of the sort of mid to high tier rounds. But I know some of you guys are struggling on the kind of early game a little bit here, and so I wanted to basically present all the options and try and format it to be clear which decision would make most sense depending on what kind of player you are. When you've made those choices, in my mind, you're ready to move on. I don't think that you should be worrying about score streaks here or building equipment or anything like that. Not on World Tier 1. Do that a little later. You also shouldn't be spinning the box because we're going to be relying on our loadout weapon. I want to reiterate that. The loadout weapon is king in this meta that I'm kind of proposing to you guys. So don't waste your money on the box. Stick with your Hauer or your Gallo. In World Tier 2, our strategy is going to be similar, but we will modify it a little depending on what we need in our loadout. If, for example, you found that you hardly got any salvage in that previous tier, then making sure you explore a little bit more to try and find some of those crates that are dotted around the map could really help your salvage supply. If you're really keen to get a points boost, then keep using those jump pads. That's absolutely an option, and you can also find points canisters hidden around the maps as well, and those can be picked up too. There's no real penalty at a round like this for doing a bunch of side quests as well, so if you've got them on your map and you feel like, I kind of want to make sure that I've got even more power at the end of this round to go into World Tier 3, then go ahead, do those side quests. But for more confident players, you really don't need to at this point. Trust the process, you're going to get the upgrades you need as we go through and as the world gets harder around you. When you finish your side quests and then you go and do your main objective, you'll then have a beacon spawn in once more, run over to it and make sure that you get your 300 points in front of the Wonder Fizz, and evaluate your points and salvage totals. Now, at this point, I would be prioritizing getting more perks. I think that that's going to make the biggest difference to your enjoyment of the game and the kind of survivability of everything. And so at this point, I'd be looking to ensure that you had Jug, Quick Revive, and then I think your next purchase should actually be Deadshot. I know that might sound weird, but to me, the damage boost this is going to give you short term is going to kind of outweigh any other perk benefits in this immediate moment. So that would be my next purchase. However, there is a caveat to this. If you have enough points to also get an ammo mod at this point from the Pack-a-Punch machine, then getting Elemental Pop from the perks machine is a totally viable option as well. This is because they synergize so well together. Elemental Pop's going to enhance that elemental damage that you get on your guns. And so that's something to definitely think about. And obviously, if you get it to tier 5, Elemental Pop's going to give you a little bit of crowd control with your reloads too, which is a nice kind of feature, but not something to write home about necessarily. So Deadshot, Elemental Pop, make your mind up here. In terms of salvage, my target here would be to get to tier 2 armor if you can. And if you've got it, then you can absolutely start spending common salvage on weapon rarity upgrades. But if you don't have it, prioritize armor tier 2 over the weapon upgrades for now. And then as soon as you get armor tier 2, you can obviously spend your rare salvage on tier 3 and you can start going crazy on the weapon upgrades. If though you're in co-op and your teammates have been thirsting all the salvage and you're really frustrated, don't worry, it's totally fine for you to go to the next world tier and still be just on tier 1 armor. It's just that I'm trying to give you an idea of how you should prioritize things as you do get that currency. Now, while we fast forward time a bit here into world tier 3, I'm going to remind you once again to not spend your points on the box because it's just not worth it, and I wouldn't bother with any other stuff in the map like wall weapons as well. Now, world tier 3 might feel a little more challenging because we didn't pack a punch again in the last world tier. We just upgraded things like perks and stuff like that. So you may feel that your power has reduced a little bit, but pack a punching again is kind of like our next immediate goal. So you're going to be looking for those 15,000 points that you need in order to get pack a punch tier 2. It might happen this tier, it might happen next tier, but whatever happens, you're going to be focusing on that as your next power spike. The reason I want to make this the kind of goal is that the salvage that you earn as you go through the map is basically just going to come to you as you play anyway. And yes, you can keep getting weapon rarities from that, but there's no real point putting like a timer on it or setting it as an aspiration because you've got to really focus on one goal at a time here. And PAP tier 2 is a significant upgrade that you basically need to work towards at this point. So that should be the focus. Also on world tiers 2 and 3, and when you're in the early game, it's again totally fine for your teammates to roam. You don't need to do the side quests all together. If you've got a weaker member on your team, then maybe you want to handhold them a little bit. But for the most part, if there are other people and they're completely strong, independent women that don't need no man, you should totally let them live their best life and explore the map as they choose. You don't need to be with them for the entirety of every single side quest. You can do your own thing, and you're actually going to earn more points collectively as a team that way, and so it kind of works out in the long run. Okay, that is enough on the basics. Let's now get into world tiers 4 to 7, section 2. It's a little bit more spicy now. Let's get into it. I know for a fact that newer players basically die at these rounds. This is where people really start to struggle. And so I'm going to give you a lot of different bits of advice here. Some might be relevant to you as a player and some might not, but overall, it's all going to be relevant to becoming a better zombies player in general. And if it's not relevant to you, then maybe it'll be helpful for a friend. So, I mean, shoot this video their way. The first thing to talk about is the difference between what you would previously have been spending your points on in the early tiers and what you're now going to be focusing your money on as you get to world tier 5, 6, etc. You're going to suddenly be confronted with the very attractive proposition of buying score streaks to make your life easier as you go through those main quest objectives. And in some cases, these are fantastic purchases. Like chopper gunners, for instance, can save your life in a pinch because if you get trapped and you just pull out a chopper gunner, then you going into the animation of the little laptop and you getting into the chopper itself is going to make you as a player invulnerable. You can't take damage as a little yellow square while you're in the chopper, and so you get out of any situation that you were stuck in. But it comes with a cost. 250 rare salvage is not cheap, and I want you guys to really weigh up the pros and cons here. Yes, it's a get out of jail free card in a sticky situation, but it's only going to last 20-30 seconds, and it's not going to mean that you completely ace every single objective that you whip one out on. So let's say, for instance, you're trying to do a defend objective. The defense might be inside a building. There's a strong chance that it's in a building, and if that's the case, your chopper is going to be very ineffective, and it's also not going to last long enough to cover your entire defense. Another example, on a holdout, you cannot use a chopper gunner. There is no option to pull it out, and so that get out of jail free card is gone, and instead Instead, you may want to pull out something like a death machine, but that obviously means that you've got the opportunity cost of not having the chopper in the first place, so there's a pros and cons situation there. The money spent on a chopper gunner could also have been spent getting you your tier 3 armor, or maybe a rarity upgrade for your Hauer, which is going to be your primary weapon of choice still at this point in the game, and so it's the most important thing for you to be upgrading beyond basically anything else. And while I did say before that going for that tier 2 Pack-a-Punch is a really good goal to have here, and then obviously tier 3 after that, you shouldn't sleep on the weapon rarity upgrades either. They'll be less than Pack-a-Punch, but they are still a fairly significant damage boost, and if you don't feel like you're getting immediately overrun and you need the chopper gunner, or a self-revive is a really good thing to craft as well, you need to remember to do that if you're in co-op because you don't spawn in with one like you do in solo, you should absolutely consider just spending all your rare salvage on those weapon upgrades. What you should not be considering spending salvage on is lethal equipment, like a tomahawk. No, get out of here. I don't want to see any of you guys making that mistake. And you can, in theory, start spending on things like decoys or monkeys to your preference, but they are pretty damn expensive purchases, and so I usually reserve those purchases for later in the game, and in these early rounds, I just try and pick them up as I go. You're also going to want to obviously finish up your perk loadout here. Now, I think that it's more important to get to your tier 3 Pack-a-Punch than it is to get your final perk. So for me, if I don't have Tombstone, for instance, but I've got all the other perks, I'd probably just chill at that point and work towards my tier 3 pack, because I could still get a free perk from doing a side quest or even doing a main quest or just doing an objective somewhere. And so it makes more sense to me to live without that perk for a little bit, just on the chance that I do get given it for free. And then I get my tier 3 pack and it just makes me feel a lot more powerful on the whole. Now, a little pro tip for co-op players is you should try and make sure that your last perk you need is different to the last perk that your teammates need. So if you're missing Elemental Pop and your teammate is missing Tombstone, then if you get a free perk on the floor and it's Elemental Pop, at least someone is going to be picking it up, and you're not going to end up in a situation where you both already have that and then, oh, well, that free perk is literally going to waste. This actually brings me nicely onto my next point, and that's the trials machine. I think that while you're totally justified to hit a trial machine round 1 if you want to and start going through them there, you may find that you want to prioritize spending those points on other things early in your game, and the reward you get from the machine at the very, very early game is not going to be transformative enough to justify the points spent, and so I usually wait until the mid game just to minimize opportunity cost, and then at this point I'll activate the machine and start working my way up to legendary. Now, I'm not interested in any rewards below legendary personally. Legendary is the only one I care about because that's going to give you a chance to get a Ray K, which is essential for this strategy. So if you do get a Ray K, absolutely keep it. Don't give a damn about the die shockwave. That thing's going to be useless for you. I would steer clear of that thing, but the Ray K is hot property, so make sure you grab it if you see one on the floor from any source. From a box, you can get them literally out of crates that are lying around the map, or from a trials machine, or from a boss. Often you're going to get them from killing HVTs. So if you see a Ray K, grab it. And the same goes for the Ray Gun, the regular Ray Gun, but its use case is a little different, and I'll explain that, I think, when we get to the kind of high round strategy here. For now, though, both are absolutely fantastic choices. If you see either, you should just pick it up. There is a caveat here, and that's for co-op players. In co-op, I think it's best to have one person with a Ray K and the rest with ray guns. This is because your actual DPS with the ray gun is going to be a bit higher, but your crowd control with the Ray K is incredibly useful, and so having a blend of those two is really handy. You're also going to notice that there are more bosses at these rounds, the zombies are speeding up, it's just getting more intense, and so making sure you're using your field upgrade is a big thing that I think a lot of people forget, but those things are so powerful. You don't want to treat this like a game of D-Machine doing the penthouse strat where you're literally just sitting in Ring of Fire trying to shoot everything from in there, and instead I think you want to think of it in a more dynamic way here. Things like Healing Aura are great for if you're trying to pick teammates up at a distance. That can be really useful, but I think it's actually pretty underpowered. I would much rather prefer you go with Ether Shroud because you pop that and you just survive for 10 seconds. It's God mode for 10 seconds. And even better, an alternative to that is Frenzied Guard. This thing is so damn good. Not only is it going to make you invincible for the 10 seconds while it's active, but you're also going to refresh all of your armor when you use it, assuming you've got it upgraded in the skill tiers. And that's going to mean that mid-round, if you're kind of getting a bit low on armor, or maybe your armor breaks, you can pop your Frenzied Guard not as a precaution because you think you're immediately going to die, but rather to get your armor back, and then you can keep whittling zombies down once you get out of the Frenzied Guard to charge it back up again so you've got it ready in your next pinch. I think with that said, the next thing I want to get to for the mid-game is to basically give you a couple of tips for the holdouts, because I know that a lot of people struggle on these, and it's something that if you start to get a kind of working strategy strategy for them, it becomes a lot easier very quickly, and this will extend into your late game as well. First of all, when you have a holdout in your game, before you start it, you should probably run over to a crafting bench if you're at all concerned about how the holdout's going to go, and craft yourself a death machine instead of a chopper gunner. The death machine can be used in the holdout, the chopper cannot, and you don't really want a war machine because the splash damage is going to mess you up, so the death machine is a great option here. And I'd also recommend grabbing a decoy or two, or maybe a monkey or two as well, if you can afford it. If you find that you don't end up using the monkeys in there, then it's fine. You'll just save them for later in the game when you will inevitably need them. And so you're not really missing out either way. It's a good idea to get these purchased if you're, again, at all concerned about how the holdout is going to go. I also think that switching over to dead wire instead of cryo freeze on your shotgun is a really good idea here, because that's going to mean that you're super effective on megatons, and megatons are basically the biggest source of death in holdouts in my mind, and so taking them down faster is a massive advantage, and dead wire is going to allow you to do that. It's only 2k points. At this point in your game, I'm sure you've got the racks to spend, and you can always swap back afterwards, so why not? It's just going to make your life easier. So for the first 30 seconds of the holdout or so, I recommend that you do not shoot any crystals that are in the house, and you just focus on holding the zombies outside the rebuildable barriers. If you have speed cola upgraded in your skill tiers, then you'll be able to rebuild them faster, but that's not essential here. I think that as long as you've got upgraded howers, you should be able to hold this first wave of zombies outside the windows without a huge amount of hassle. And if you're in solo, what you'll probably find is that you'll have zombies that are attacking maybe 3 windows at a time, and you can run over to one and rebuild it, and then turn around and shoot backwards into the house at any zombies that are coming at you, and then run over to that window that just got breached, repair that, and meanwhile turn around and shoot the zombies that are now behind you. So you don't need to be kind of trying to hoard from the very first second you get into the holdout here. You can try and keep them outside for as long as possible, certainly before you hit that kind of round noise that tells you that the next wave is oncoming. As soon as you hit that noise, you can scavenge for crystals if you want, and there's a chance that those are going to help you replenish your armor, stuff like that. And then you kind of have a decision to make as a team. If you do not have a Ray K, then things are going to be very different if you do have a Ray K here, and you're going to have to rely on pure firepower in order to get through the holdout, and it is more difficult. So let me talk about the Ray K strategy first. As soon as you are truly overwhelmed in there and you cannot hold the rebuildable barriers any longer, you're probably going to want to fall back as a group or as a solo player into the smaller room that is kind of contained within the holdout that you are defending. There will always be a smaller room, and it will mean that you have a kind of funnel through which the zombies can only really get to you via the front, or via the front and one window in the back. You can have one member of your team defending the back window, and then the other member of your team, preferably the one with the Ray K, can be shooting its alternate fire into the front doorway kind of entrance of that smaller room, and basically slowing every single zombie that gets anywhere near you in there. It's also going to slow special enemies, and so if, for example, a mimic spawns in, it's going to get slowed down, and it will be a lot easier to kill it with the alternate fire, blasting it and basically keeping it nice and frozen. I think in an ideal world, this strat works best with 3 people, because then you basically have one person focusing DPS on the front, one person DPSing on the back window, and then one person that's using the Ray K the entire time. But this does absolutely work with fewer people as well. The Ray K is a godsend for slowing things down, and it will work throughout your game in any scenario really, but especially in these holdout situations. Now, if you are in solo, what you're probably going to find is that you may need to pop your frenzied guard a little sooner than you might do in a co-op game, because in co-op, obviously, if your teammate pops frenzied guard, then they're going to get all the zombie aggro for those 15 seconds, and you're going to be chilling, whereas in solo, you can't rely on that happening. You have to pop it yourself. This is why I did mention Ether Shroud as a potential thing that solo players may prefer, because you're going to get 2 charges of that Ether Shroud, whereas with Frenzied Guard, you only get 1. However, the downside is that you do not get an armor refresh with Ether Shroud, and so if you end up getting squishy in there, then you're going to stay squishy no matter how many times you shroud out of danger. As a result of all this, I think that the ideal flow, solo or co-op, is basically as follows. You jump into the holdout and hold for 30 seconds, trying to keep the zombies outside the rebuildable barriers and using your shotgun. Then you basically hold until you get overwhelmed, and you push through that kind of middle wave, and if needed, if you feel any kind of sketchiness happening or you lose your armor, that's when you pop your Frenzied Guard. The reason for this is that you basically want to use your Frenzied Guard at a time where it's going to restore your armor and you're going to have enough time later to lose it again. I know that might sound weird, but it's basically balancing the usage of the extra armor that it gives you you. And so yes, you're in a way popping it a little prematurely, but assuming you have decoys or monkey bombs, this shouldn't be a problem because your armor's going to be refreshed and you're going to be able to lean on that equipment that you've got in order to keep yourself safe for the final kind of stage of the holdout. And you should have things like a death machine as well, which you can use while you've got your frenzied guard to clear that room out if you so desire, and therefore get back to a situation where you can basically window hold for an extra 20 seconds or so while you get overwhelmed for the final stage of the holdout. This means that you reduce your reliance on the Ray K a little bit and also reduce your reliance on having teammates, which is a really useful thing, obviously, if you're solo. But you could also optionally just literally chill in the small room the whole time, just using the Ray K and slowing stuff down, and that's viable too. The specifics of what works for you is going to depend on the circumstances of your game, the number of players, who's got what weapons, etc. So you will need to customize what I'm saying here based on what would be appropriate for you, but I'm trying to give you as much information as possible to make the best possible decision. Now, where this can get hairy is when megatons start spawning in. You will hear them spawn very clearly. And the reason these are particularly pesky is that they're going to split and then they're going to have their megaton blaster forms and they're going to shoot at you. And it's kind of just an awkward scenario because you're in such a tight space. The recommendation I have for these is if it's near the end of the round and you have a chance to slow megatons down far away from you, then I would do that. 100% use that Ray K and slow them down. And bear in mind as well that if you slow a megaton with the Ray K and then you pop it and it's going to start splitting into its megaton blaster's form, that whole animation will also be slowed down. And so that can buy you like genuinely 15, 20 seconds for free just by virtue of the fact that you slowed it before you started popping it. In my mind, the megatons are the hardest part of this really. And as long as you're focusing them down, the rest of things should fall into place in my opinion. And also, I guess one last tip for the holdouts is if you get knocked down and you're getting revived in some way, like let's say for example your self-revive is usable and your little health bar is just ticking down slowly while you're on the floor, you can honestly burn a couple of extra seconds, and as long as you're not obviously losing perks imminently, this isn't going to be putting you at any kind of disadvantage. You're just going to use up time in the holdout and be closer to completing it when you stand back up, so it's kind of a win-win. I think that should give you an idea of how best to handle those though. Now let's move on to the final section of the video, the end game. This kind of encompasses rounds 7 to 10 and then also just everything else after that. And it's at these rounds that you're going to start seeing repeated objectives as well, because at this point you've gone through all of the main objectives at least once. And so you're going to start getting to your second holdout and your second defense and stuff like that. It's at this point that every round you're going to want to basically do a kind of inventory check to make sure that you've got absolutely everything you need before going into the next world tier. So the first thing to check is your perks. Did you go down on that round? If you've got any perk slots that you need to fill, then you're going to need to buy them now. And it's at this point that if you don't already have stamina up, you're going to really want that because those zombies are going to start super sprinting and you're not going to be able to get away from them otherwise. You'll also want to make sure that you've got a self-revive, whether you're in solo or co-op, you can still craft those things. And while you're there, you may want to grab yourself a new chopper gunner as well. That same bench is also where you craft decoys and monkeys, and I'm personally more of a fan of decoys, I think, because you can just yeet them out really fast, but monkeys are a great option too. Make sure your armor's refreshed and make sure you've upgraded your shotgun to the max weapon tier and max pack-a-punched it as well. And if you don't have an alternate ammo type on it yet, then what the hell are you doing? Get yourself some cryo freeze. Now, I think I should probably pause and talk about why cryo freeze for a sec here. I'm well aware that for a long time people have thought that it's actually the worst ammo mod you can choose, but let me make a case for it at least, and you can always disagree with me and use something else, but this is my interpretation of the data as it stands that the game is giving me. If you take a look at Shatterblast, Deadwire, and Brain Rot, you'll see that they all have long cooldowns, 25 seconds, 15 seconds, and 40 seconds respectively. Now to me, this is an indication that you should be relying more on their passive ability rather than their active. So for example, Brain Rot has the passive that it's super effective against mimics, which is great, don't get me wrong, but in my mind, you're not really fighting enough mimics at once at any given stage of your game that it would justify you exclusively using Brain Rot and losing out on any of the other benefits that you could have taking down other enemies faster. I think of the 3 long cooldowns, Deadwire is definitely the most attractive because of the fact that it makes you super effective against megatons, and megatons really are the most tricky enemy to take down, I think, in general. They're a really annoying combination of very damaging to you as a player and damaging to your health bar, while also being really strong, and so Deadwire is probably the best option out of these 3 in my mind. But let's now consider the short cooldown options as well and see if they're any better. There's Napalm Burst with a 3 3-second cooldown, and cryo with a 1-second cooldown. Now, looking at napalm, it's basically just a DPS buff, and our shotgun is going to be powerful enough at those late rounds and at the max health cap that it's actually not going to be really necessary to get like an extra 10%, 20% damage on that shotty. And instead, I think that prioritizing things that allow you to get away from the enemies more easily because they're going to be super sprinting and chasing you down like crazy is much more advantageous here. And that's exactly what cryo allows you to do. It'll slow the enemies for up to 50% of their run speed for up to 5 seconds. And if you proc it on them, they'll take 25% more damage, and it resets every second, and it's percentage chance based on bullets hitting zombies. And if you're using it on a shotgun, your chances of proccing it are basically 100%. And this sounds too good to be true, but believe me, try it in your game, and pretty much every other zombie you shoot is going to get procced with cryo freeze and slow down to almost walking pace and be nowhere near fast enough to hit you. And if that wasn't enough of a reason to use cryo, it also means that you're super effective on panzers as well. A lot of people don't realize this, but if you shoot a panzer in its like jetpack with cryo freeze, you're going to take it down to like 50% health in seconds. And if you pop its mask off, you'll also be super effective to its face with cryo as well. In my mind, this confluence of advantages is too good to pass up, and that's why I run cryo in nearly all my games now. With all that said, we now know what we're going to be kind of grinding towards in our loadout at the end of each round, making sure that we've got everything maxed out and we've got cryo on our gun and we've got all our armor refreshed and stuff like that. And I guess the only possible gap in your arsenal at this point could be getting yourself either the RAI K or the Ray Gun. Now, in my experience, if you don't have this by around round kind of 8 to 10, you're going to start pulling only legendaries from the box, and so you are going to have a higher chance of getting the RAI K from there. But potentially an even better option is to do the objectives on the map that are 3 skulls that spawn in some high value targets for you to take down. These enemies always drop really good rewards, and at this kind of round as well, you should be powerful enough to take those enemies down without too much hassle, and you're potentially literally spawning in multiple extra chances because there are multiple HVTs to get yourself that RAI K for free. So this is a really good option, and before about round 10, in my mind, I'd say I'd prioritize that over spinning the box, and I'd also prioritize finishing up my trials to try and get them from legendary rewards. If you get to around world 10 and you still don't have the RAI K though, I would then spend around a third of my points on spinning the mystery box in order to try and get it. And I would then spend another 30% on round 11 and keep sort of slowly sinking some money into the box in order to play the RNG game and hope for the best there. The reason I didn't suggest this earlier in your game is that once you get to around round 8 or 9 in solo, round 10 in co-op, you're going to find that the mystery box is just full of legendaries pretty much. Like the chances of legendaries are much higher. And so it's only at this point that I think that the risk reward for spinning the mystery box becomes worthwhile. If you're really desperate, then don't get me wrong, you should be doing all the side quests on all the world tiers as well, just to give yourself even more chances. And you can also get the RAI K from those like large crates that are around the map as well. That is something that can happen, but obviously it's reliant on you finding those things, and sometimes it's just easier to just do a side quest because it's marked on your map. So assuming that that then works out for you and you end up basically with your kind of armory, your arsenal, your loadout all maxed out and you're good to go, what do you actually do in order to get through those higher rounds successfully? Like, what's the trick? In my eyes, it's kind of like a continuation of the holdout strat that I mentioned to you before, but it sort of begins to apply to everything in a weird way. If you're in co-op, you're going to have one teammate that is pretty much exclusively using the RAI K to slow enemies for you guys. And this goes for nearly all the objectives. Like, this is always going to be useful, having the zombies slowed in that way. And then your other teammates can focus on DPS and just blasting the enemies away with their ray guns or whatever. And if you're in solo, the rhythm is going to be a bit different, but using cryo freeze in your shotgun is going to mean that your life is a lot easier. I would say that in solo, a really important thing to do is clear out the area that you're in before you start an objective. So let's say you're starting an escort. I don't think that you should start that with a load of enemies already on you because it's just unnecessarily overwhelming yourself. Take those guys down first in that initial area and then start the objective and actually get going. If at any point you feel overwhelmed, you should be prioritizing using your frenzied guard before you use your special equipment. And the reason for this is that you use your frenzied guard and that gets used up. It's gone. You don't have charge in your meter anymore. Then you can rely on that support equipment like decoys and like monkeys in order to keep yourself safe while your frenzied is not charged. And then ideally, by the time you've run out of those things, you have an extra frenzied charge to use. And by that point, it's like a full 2 minutes later in your game, and you're more than likely going to be through whatever kind of very sticky situation you might have been in, and you'll be able to make your way over to a crafting bench and buy more decoys or maybe go and get an armor refresh or whatever you need to do. I would say obviously keep moving at all times, but I think that's pretty obvious at this point because those super sprinters are just going to wreck you otherwise, and that's why cryo is so useful here. Shooting those zombies before they kind of get close to you is going to mean that they're slowed down, and if you've got it to tier 5, you may also find that they then slow other enemies as well when the cryo freeze spreads to them. So it's a win-win. I would also try and avoid any enemies that are on the way to the main objective, because at this point in your game, especially if you're at like 15, 20 plus, there is very little reason for you to do anything other than the main objective in any world. Like, you should be set up at that point, and so you don't need to do anything else. There's literally no reason to. The main objective is the only thing stopping you going to the next world tier, and so you might as well just rinse and repeat that over and over again. There are some kind of, I guess, miscellaneous tips that might be useful for you to hear here for various objectives. One is that when you're doing an escort, the thing that you're escorting is going to sometimes transform. So in the back of that little rover, you'll end up with like an insta-kill, and you can grab that. So if you need it in a pinch, totally go for it. Another tip for retrieve steps is if you get a teammate to pull up with a vehicle or something, you can grab a canister and then literally just get on top of the vehicle and they can drive you to the objective. And it makes your life a lot easier, but you obviously need to be really careful that your vehicle doesn't get disabled or blown up because you'll lose your armor. And if you're in solo, what I think is also a really viable strategy for this is basically popping your frenzied guard just before you pick up the canister, because then what's going to happen is you're going to get that new special ability while your canister's in your hand, and that's going to keep you safe as you go to the drop point, and it's going to refresh your armor on the way there, and you're just going to basically buy yourself 10 seconds to get out of that initial pickup location, because that can be a little sketchy. It's basically sketchy getting out of the pickup, but less dropping it off in my experience. And when you are dropping off, if things are sketchy, I would also then just use your special ability on that field upgrade that you get from the canister, even if there's no zombies around you, just because you're going to lose it as soon as the canister is deposited, and so you might as well just do a little burst while you're putting the canister in. I think for defense rounds, your best bet is to actually rely a little bit on letting the console get hit. It can be very tempting to try and make sure that it takes only like 10% damage through the entire thing, but honestly, you don't need to do this. It can take a pretty large amount of damage, and so if you do get into a really hairy situation and you just need to kind of back off for a second, you can totally do that, and then maybe throw a decoy or something and kind of get back into your rhythm, or just chuck a load of the alternate ammo types of the Ray K down, and that's going to slow the enemies down and stop them hitting it as quickly, and that'll give you a second to reset as well. But don't feel like if it gets below 50% health, you're instantly going to die and you need to totally panic. It doesn't work like that. It's got quite a lot of health. Use it to your advantage. I'm sure a lot of you guys have extra tips as well that you're kind of aware of and that I haven't mentioned yet in the video. If this is the case, then totally drop those in the comments down below. I think that sharing is caring here, guys, and the more we can help each other as a community, the more that we'll be able to push into new strategies and new high rounds and things like that in the future. Now then, with all this talk of getting to high rounds, it's important to not forget that you can exfil in this mode. I know that it's not something that a lot of people are doing right now, but it's totally an option, and the best way to do this, honestly, is to start the exfil and then run straight over to the exfil location and literally get there, try and sort of take down as many zombies as you can for the first maybe like 30 seconds once you arrive, but then just jump in your chopper and blitz everything. The reason we're doing it this way is that the zombies that are outside the area will not count as kills towards your counter. You need to kill them within the area, and so we're going to run in there, try and survive on foot for a little bit just so all the zombies run into the area, and then we're going to jump in the chopper, and that's what's going to count for all the kills that we need. If you're worried that your chopper's going to last too long, you can also prematurely just get out of it. Don't worry, that is totally an option, but in general, the key to this is to be in the area itself where the chopper is going to be landing before you start getting the kills. It's also worth noting that only one person can be in a chopper at once in a game, and so if you jump into a chopper, you might actually be sort of inadvertently killing your teammates by doing that, so make sure you kind of get the green light from air traffic control to just make sure that you're not screwing people over by jumping in. So, whew. Wow, 40 minutes, Jesus. With all of that said, I've spent a hell of a lot of time compiling this video. Big Joey Conway's editing this thing like a madman right now and probably hates me for giving him all this work to do. But honestly, I'm just trying to help you guys out. And if you're appreciative of that, then if you could subscribe to the channel, that would be amazing. And dropping a like on the video would be really nice too. Let's get some thank you Joey Conways in the comments section. I've been MrRoflWaffles. There'll be other videos on screen for you to click right now if you want more zombies content from me. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.